Emotional scenes in what's believed to be the first open court testimony by women challenging Texas's abortion ban. More today on the Texas Standard.
Texas Standard is a production of KUT Austin, KERA North Texas, Houston Public Media, and Texas Public Radio in San Antonio.
I'm David Brown. 13 patients and 2 doctors challenging medical exceptions to the state's abortion ban, saying they're unclear and unworkable and causing harm to patients. We'll hear more about this closely watched case. Reporters statewide offer an update on how Texans are coping with this record heat. Also, a massive release of greenhouse gases in West Texas brought on by the heat. Dylan Baddour of Inside Climate News with details. New cybersecurity labels for consumer products and Barbie's big splash causing ripples statewide. All that and more coming up today on the Texas Standard. No matter where you are, it's Texas Standard Time on this 20th day of July, 2023. I'm David Brown. Great to have you with us. In a courthouse in the Texas capital city yesterday, emotional testimony in a case being closely watched, not just in Texas, but nationwide. This case is being brought by the Center for Reproductive Rights on behalf of several women challenging Texas's strict abortion ban, which provides medical exceptions for people who have complications with their pregnancies. One plaintiff told of feeling compelled to give birth to a baby who lived for just 4 hours. As she recounted her doomed pregnancy on the witness stand and the baby's death, she broke down in tears and became physically ill, her husband rushing to the witness stand to comfort her, many in the courtroom in tears, including, according to a report by NPR, one of the state's own attorneys defending the abortion law. The state's trying to have the case dismissed. For more on why this case is attracting so much attention and what the implications may be, we're joined by Olivia Aldridge, who covers healthcare for our home station, KUT in Austin. Olivia, welcome back to the Texas Standard.
Thank you.
What makes this case so unique in the landscape of legal action playing out across the country around the issue of abortion?
Well, this is thought to be the first case in which women are directly suing a state in regards to their rights to abortion access since the U.S. Supreme Court's Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization decision last year. That's when the federal right to abortion was overturned. And in fact, this would also be the first time that this has happened since 1973 during testimony for Roe versus Wade. So a lot of eyes have also really been on Texas since SB 8 passed in September 2021, because that 6-week abortion ban was really the first of its kind among the states, and Dobbs, of course, triggered more abortion restrictions in other states and in Texas as well. So now there's this case brought by 13 women plus 2 physicians where Texas is again the first to sort of breach new territory in this area.
I know that the state recently passed a law related to abortion in cases of ectopic pregnancy or when a patient's water breaks too early. What is this lawsuit seeking to clarify that goes beyond the scope of that law that I think is supposed to ensure access to abortion in such cases, right?
Right. So Molly Duane, who's the lead attorney on the Center for Reproductive Rights legal team in this case, spoke to this in her opening remarks yesterday. And she said essentially that it just doesn't go very far to only specify 2 conditions that would be cause for an emergency abortion. In fact, she said it's impossible to draw up a complete list of medical scenarios that should qualify, and that would always result in someone kind of falling through the cracks. There's also Dr. Damla Kazan. She's a plaintiff in this case, and she's an OBGYN. She testified yesterday that the exception to this law, as it's currently written, is vague. And considering the penalties, if she's found to have given an abortion that doesn't qualify for this exception, those penalties can include triple-digit fines, serious prison time, the loss of her medical license. She just feels that her hands are tied, and she often can't give people an abortion, even when she considers it the best medical option. So what the plaintiffs want to establish is a binding interpretation of this exception that allows physicians to exercise their good faith judgment in consultation with the pregnant person. That's their precise language.
Is there anything else that the plaintiffs here, the women suing the state, are asking for in the short term?
Yes, in the short term, they're seeking a temporary injunction of Texas's abortion ban as it applies to medical emergencies, and they want that to be in place until this case is completely sorted out. And in the meantime, the state's attorneys are also asking for something. They just want the case to be dismissed outright. They've argued that the women involved in this case are incorrectly blaming state law for the fact that they were denied medical abortion care when the decision lay in the hands of their physicians.
So let's look to possible long-term implications of this case. What are you hearing from advocates?
Well, if Jessica Mangrum, the judge for this hearing, does decide to issue a temporary injunction, that would theoretically give physicians in Texas more leeway to decide what qualifies as a life-threatening condition that warrants an abortion under state law, at least temporarily. And on the other hand, if the plaintiffs are ultimately unsuccessful with this case, it's possible, some advocates say, that we'll see more OBGYNs start to see practicing in Texas as a risky proposition. Dr. Judy Levison, who is a faculty member at a Houston medical school and also a plaintiff in this case, has said that she personally took a step back from medicine post-Dobbs because she didn't feel she could practice in a manner consistent with the ethics of her position. And she says she's seen this widespread fear and trepidation among her colleagues as well.
What are we hearing about timeline on this? Any expectations on when some kind of order or decision?
We really don't know. This question was asked yesterday to Molly DeWayne again, and it just depends on the judge. This can take, hours, days, weeks. We just have to wait for a decision there. But testimony in this hearing will wrap up at the end of the day today.
Olivia Aldridge covers healthcare for our home station KUT in Austin. Olivia, thanks for the update.
Thank you.
This summer's record-breaking heat hasn't just been uncomfortable. It's led to a major release of excess emissions in West Texas. The Texas Tribune and Inside Climate News report that companies in the Permian Basin vented millions of pounds of natural gas directly into the atmosphere during last month's heat wave. Here with more, Dylan Baddour, Texas-based reporter for Inside Climate News. Dylan, welcome back.
Thanks for having me, David.
You report that 300 tons of greenhouse gases were released in 5 counties back in June during a heat wave. Can you put that in some perspective for us? I'm not sure a lot of folks can sort of grasp what that actually means. What is 300 tons of greenhouse gas?
Sure. So this is more than 300 tons of methane. Natural gas is 95% methane. So that comes out to be the carbon emissions of roughly 5,000 cars in 1 year. That's measured in terms of carbon dioxide, which is what gas would emit as it burns. But because this gas was vented in its raw form, it has greenhouse warming potential up to 80 times higher than carbon dioxide, which is why this relatively small quantity of gas, 300-400 tons, sounds like a lot, but in the broad scheme, it's quite a small portion of annual U.S. emissions. But because it was raw methane, it has a very potent effect.
Why was this raw methane vented? Aren't there other ways to get rid of gas if it's building up in underground pipelines?
Sure. The engineers that I talked with told me that this methane was essentially vented out of laziness and corner cutting. What happened is that, there's these massive pipelines that carry gas from the fields of the Permian Basin all the way to end users. Those pipelines depend on large compressors to move gas through hundreds of miles. When the air outside gets too hot, those compressors cannot run at full power. And if one compressor dials back, then all the other ones in the system have to dial back because these pipelines are like a big highway. If there's a traffic jam, then everybody has to stop moving. Otherwise, you crash and make an explosion.
But if you slow that highway down, you're going to end up with compressed gas in those pipes.
Yep. And that's why pressure builds up in certain sections, and they had to release it through pressure relief valves.
Well, did they have to release it this way? As you were mentioning, engineers were telling you that that's sort of a lazy way out, that there are other ways of handling this, but you sort of have to prep for it. And apparently that work wasn't done?
Yeah, that's how it seems. The easiest way to deal with this would be to plan ahead and put less gas in your system in anticipation of these higher temperatures. There are also mobile tanks and compressors that could be deployed at pipelines to capture the gas that's released. instead of just venting it into the air. And there's other, more expensive insulation and temperature control technologies that could be installed.
But of course, all of this has been brought on by heat, high heat, which is causing this. And so in a way, this is sort of contributing to a vicious cycle, right? You release the methane gas, which is a greenhouse gas. Greenhouse gas warms the planet gets hotter and creates these conditions that led to the release.
Yep, you said it. It's kind of a grim cycle there. It's for all of my life, we've been talking about, warming globe, and this year we're seeing record-breaking heat all across the whole planet. This heat comes in part due to the warming effects of carbon emissions from fossil fuels. And in this case, we see how extreme heat accelerates emissions of greenhouse gases. So we get kind of a feedback loop there, and it's not really where we want to be.
What about regulators? I mean, is it, I understand a lot of this is self-reported.
Yeah, that's an important point. All of this data was self-reported, meaning it's possible that releases were much more widespread, but only one company here really followed through with its legal reporting requirements. So in a way, while we're talking a lot about this company's errors, they did, in good faith, report it to regulators. Now, those reports go to the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, the TCEQ, and the TCEQ will review them, determine if these releases were unavoidable or if operator error was made, and then decide whether or not to levy a fine, although fines from the TCEQ are extremely rare.
I've been talking with Dylan Baddour. He's Texas reporter for Inside Climate News, and there's a whole lot more in this story worth checking out. We'll have a link to it at texasstandard.org. Dylan, thank you.
Thank you, David.
Let's check in with Wells Dunbar, our social media editor, find out what Texans are talking about on this Thursday. Wells, welcome back.
Hi, David. Well, we're hearing from folks about the story at the top of the show, the Center for Reproductive Rights suing Texas on behalf of several women who were denied abortions amid serious pregnancy complications. On our Facebook page, Kelly's story says, "I don't get it. Whatever happened to minding your own business? These women, all women, deserve bodily autonomy." She goes on to call out hard-hearted, blindly obvious politicians imposing their values on other humans. Meanwhile, another story we've been following continues to reverberate. That whistleblower from the Department of Public Safety describing inhumane treatment of migrants at the border, denying water to dehydrated people, forcefully pushing groups, including children, back into the Rio Grande, and more. David Lee Beiser brings up some issues surrounding that as well. He notes that there are 6 regions of the state that DPS patrols. Which parts are currently understaffed due to their patrolling Austin and their role in the border response? Interesting question there indeed. A couple of the topics that folks are talking about this Thursday. I'll be back with more later in the show.
There's a new federal cybersecurity label for consumers, but what's it really for, and will it really protect user data? Our go-to tech expert, Omar Gallago, will have more on that as the Texas Standard continues.
Support for Texas Standard comes from TCU, where Horned Frogs strive to build a better future through research. Stories on how TCU researchers are addressing sustainability issues, healthcare, and more at endeavors.tcu.edu.
It's the Texas Standard. I'm David Brown. During Hurricane Harvey and other natural disasters, many Texans turned to their neighbors for help. Now some people in Houston are taking it a step further, transforming their homes into emergency hubs for their community. Katie Watkins of Houston Public Media got a tour.
From her house in Northeast Houston, Doris Brown has endured so many extreme weather events, she has trouble recalling them all.
Oh, my God. I think 2 or 3 hurricanes. Harvey was the most devastating. We had Imelda. We had Ike. We had Uri in the freeze. That almost killed me because my house is all electric.
Northeast Houston, where Brown lives, is one of the most flood-prone areas in Houston. Even just heavy rains can leave Brown and her neighbors trapped in their homes waiting for help.
I couldn't leave. I was a prisoner in my own home. When it rained 2 or 3 consecutive days, real heavy all at once, I have a little river floating down my street.
Brown didn't want to feel powerless, so she and her neighbors hatched a plan. They turned their own homes into these neighborhood refuge centers for extreme weather events.
It was happening a little bit too often. So now we decided to take care of ourselves, and we come up with the hub houses.
Brown's home is one of these hub houses. Her neighborhood worked with West Street Recovery, a nonprofit, to create 4 other hub houses in Northeast Houston neighborhoods.
I'm what they call a block captain.
That's Carolyn Rivera, who lives in the Stedegas neighborhood and turned her home into one of the hub houses. She says she met with her neighbors to decide what supplies the hub house should have.
Let's go. It's in the garage.
Her garage is lined with rows of wooden shelves neatly stocked up with disaster supplies.
We have vests, because sometimes people are leaving their homes and they need those vests. We have a kayak, hand sanitizer.
They've thought of everything.
Bug spray, soap. Here, this is for repairs, gloves, duct tape.
There's a section for cold weather and for extreme heat. Each hub has solar panels and a backup battery so it can operate off the grid during power outages. Neighbors can also check out their own generators.
We have everything they need to be comfortable until they can get back into their routine. I've lived here many years, and during the disaster, we did not have people to come and help us.
As climate change feels more frequent and more extreme weather disasters, this concept of neighborhood-level resilience hubs is spreading across the country. They're being set up by nonprofits and local governments. Harris County is also working on a pilot project to install solar panels and backup battery systems at 16 county community centers and libraries.
When there's grid challenges with either extreme heat or extreme cold, and these are the type of critical county assets that really need to stay online.
That's Lisa Lynn, the county's director of sustainability. She says during the winter freeze, one of the libraries was serving as an overnight warming shelter.
Then that eventually went offline too, and so they actually had to move those residents to another location. And so that was one of the things that had kind of come up when we were talking about like potential library sites. What were the areas that really served these community members?
Doris Brown in Northeast Houston says she already saw some of the benefits of the hub house. Storms in June knocked out the power in her neighborhood, but the lights at her house stayed on.
So I winded up having about 15 or 20 people here. The babies had to keep the milk cold, and stuff like that. And then I had a neighbor with oxygen and needed their oxygen and stuff. So everybody was in the living room, in the kitchen.
With hurricane season underway, Brown says she feels more prepared. I'm Katie Watkins in Houston.
Support for Coverage of Business comes from Texas Mutual Insurance Company, a workers' comp provider dedicated to helping businesses work safer, stronger, better, providing driver safety videos and resources to help protect workers on the road. More at texasmutual.com/driversafety.
And you are listening to the Texas Standard. When you buy a smart appliance like a refrigerator or a device, a fitness tracker like a Fitbit, for example, how do you know whether your personal data is at risk? Well, that's the concern behind the Biden administration's new Cyber Trust Mark, which is a voluntary certification label unveiled this week. It's supposed to provide useful information about the safety and security of home-based Internet of Things devices that connect to the Internet. But will a label really protect our data or make us smarter about which appliance to buy? Our tech expert Omar Gallaga has an early look at what the FCC has called Energy Star, but for the security of smart devices. Omar, welcome back.
Thanks for having me, David.
They call this thing the Cyber Trust Mark. The first thing I thought of was Underwriter Laboratories, the old UL mark that used to appear. I think it still appears on a lot of appliances and things. That was started because of a need, a danger that, fire hazards and electricity back around the turn of the century. This sounds a bit like the digital version of that, a sort of, what does this Cyber Trust Mark indicate?
Yeah, it's digital hazards, things like how your data is going to be used, how often security updates are being issued for the device, and it's going to include things like smart refrigerators and smart TVs, climate control systems like your Nest thermostat, but also fitness trackers, things like your Fitbits and presumably your Apple Watch. So things that would be covered with this certification and labeling program. And it's really just a way to give consumers more information about all of the things that we worry about, password security, things like that. So one area that I thought was interesting was they are thinking about including routers as well. Routers have been really problematic as far as eavesdropping, password theft, people kind of getting into your stuff. So that is one device category that they're considering adding as well.
Is this more about personal security or more about sort of global information control? I mean, we've heard a lot about some of these companies that are large in China, affiliated with the Communist Party, that the Biden administration and other administrations have been concerned about gathering the information and data of millions of Americans?
I think it's more of a consumer security, just a way to give customers, people who are directly buying these devices, ways of getting that information more easily. It's not just going to be a label that they stamp on the box. It's also going to be a QR code that you can scan with your phone and then go to a place where it would give you all kinds of data, presumably. I mean, it depends on the company. It depends on what data they're willing to offer, but it would be presumably things like what's the default password security on it? How often are they going to issue updates? Are they still supporting this device? That's one thing with obsolescence is, it's been, you might have owned the device for 2 or 3 years. Are they still supporting it with security updates? What health information is it gathering? Is it selling that information to a third party?
I see. Yeah.
It's voluntary, though, so we don't know how much information these companies are going to put in each of these. It might be different for every device.
Well, do we know who's on board with this? And I noticed, by the way, in your listing of devices, I didn't hear smartphones. Did I miss that?
I believe smartphones are part of it, but again, it's voluntary. Every company is going to decide, whether they're going to include themselves and get those devices certified. And Apple is not on the list yet. That is the big one that is not listed on who these partners would be who are on board. But it does include Google, Samsung, Logitech, Amazon, which makes a lot of devices, Best Buy, LG, Qualcomm, Cisco Systems, and the Connectivity Standards Alliance, which they're in charge of the Matter home device standard that is certifying a lot of smart home products.
Is the government actually testing or verifying any of these claims that companies are providing?
No, and the companies themselves wouldn't do it either. It would be a third party like the Connectivity Standards Alliance or CTA, the Consumer Technology Association. They would do this as a third party.
When can we expect to see these labels on things we buy?
Well, the whole program isn't even going to be in place until next year, so it would be sometime after that. So 2024, and then the labels would be on devices. Presumably, they'll be certifying between now and then, but this isn't even in place yet for this year.
Watch this space. Omar Gallaga certainly is. He writes about technology for Wired, and he joins us on The Standard each week. Omar, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, David. I sure appreciate it.
Support for Texas Standard comes from Enel North America, an energy company committed to affordability and reliability, helping Texas homes and businesses access clean energy solutions. More at enelnorthamerica.com/Texas.
From the Texas Newsroom, I'm Matt Thomas. The dangerous heat wave will continue for at least a couple more days across much of the state. Meanwhile, more than 100,000 prisoners in Texas are struggling to stay cool. 2/3 of the state's prisons lack air conditioning. More from TPR's Paul Flav in San Antonio.
June saw temperatures soar inside Texas prisons, with many exceeding 100 degrees. One inmate says state efforts to give respite have failed to give relief.
Tell you, I'm waking up and I'm going to sleep pouring sweat. You got to wash your sheets every day because they're literally soaking wet when you wake up. It's not livable conditions at all.
His name's been withheld because the Texas prison system bars inmates from recorded phone interviews with news media. A November 2022 study linked 271 deaths in Texas prisons over a near 20-year period to extreme heat. The state legislature again failed to pass funding to expand cooling systems in prisons. I'm Paul Flav in San Antonio.
Former Texas Congressman Will Hurd lashing out against former President Donald Trump. In an interview with ABC's The View, Hurd, who is running for the Republican presidential nomination, said he's not worried about polls that are showing Trump way ahead of the pack.
Donald Trump is a threat to our national security. If we want to be rid of Donald Trump, we have to beat him in the Republican primary. Full stop.
Hurd served in Congress for about 6 years. He's now one of more than a dozen Republicans seeking the nomination. 2 Texas public university systems have expanded access to mental health care services for their students. We get more from TPR's Camille Phillips.
Starting this fall, students enrolled in UT, Texas State, or any of the universities in the UT and Texas State systems will have access to virtual mental health care 24/7. Both university systems have invested in partnerships with an online provider called Timely Care to provide the service at no additional cost for students. Depression among young adults has been rising for more than a decade, a troubling trend that has been exacerbated by the pandemic. A recent poll from the Lumina Foundation also found that emotional stress is now the primary reason students are considering dropping out of college. I'm Camille Phillips in San Antonio.
Federal student loans for about 64,000 Texans will be forgiven after a U.S. Department of Education review found they qualify to benefit from more than $3 billion that's being made available by the government. The Texas Tribune reports this applies only to those whose debts should have been forgiven previously due to administrative failures. I'm Matt Thomas from the Texas Newsroom.
Support for these Texas headlines comes from UT Health Houston, School of Public Health, offering graduate-level degrees for public health leaders in Texas and beyond. Learn more at go.uth.edu/bebold.
33 minutes past the hour, Texas Standard Time. I'm David Brown. Seems like it's been quite some time since there's been buzz around summer blockbusters matching that of Barbenheimer. For the uninitiated, that's the portmanteau of Barbie and Oppenheimer, two much-hyped movies to be released on Friday with starkly different tones. We're going to hear more about the famous doll a little bit later in the broadcast. But first, we're talking all things Oppenheimer with journalist Greg Mitchell. He's author of the book, The Beginning or the End: How Hollywood and America Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb. Love that title, Greg. Welcome to the Texas Standard.
I'm very happy to be here. Thank you.
I want to ask you about your background because the book I mentioned, you're also the author of a Substack about Robert Oppenheimer, father of the atomic bomb, as he's often referred to. What's behind your personal interest in the atomic era and how Hollywood has depicted it?
Well, I've been writing about it for 40 years now, 3 books. I recently directed a documentary film, but I like to say it goes back to what became and remained my favorite movie of all time, which was Dr. Strangelove. In the early 1960s, I was a younger person and one of the many who were caught up in the nuclear terror of the time, and for some reason Dr. Strangelove really clicked with me, and I sort of remained interested in the bomb forever, really.
Your story, the story that you explore, The Beginning or the End, really the story behind the first movie about the atomic bomb, if by my count. I mean, we're talking about a 1947 docudrama, The Beginning or the End. Could you say a little bit more about that film for those who aren't familiar with it and the controversy that surrounded it?
Yeah, it was launched by MGM shortly after Hiroshima, and it was inspired by the atomic scientists who were warning about the future of nuclear weapons and not building bigger and more of them. After it got to MGM and they did the first scripts, suddenly the Pentagon, under General Groves, who you'll see in the Oppenheimer movie, and President Truman, who you'll also see, their intervention turned the film, which was supposed to be kind of a warning to the world, really into pro-bomb propaganda. And Oppenheimer himself kind of played a disgraceful role in that he finally caved and allowed himself to be depicted and serve as narrator in this drama, even though he knew it was very badly written and had contained many falsehoods.
And it's a fascinating story, too, that we should point out, so folks aren't confused. The new Oppenheimer movie is based on a different book, a biography of Oppenheimer called American Prometheus, I believe.
Right.
I understand you've had a chance to see the new Oppenheimer film. You mentioned Grove. You mentioned Truman there. What did it seem to get right and get wrong?
Well, it gets a lot right. I'd say it's tremendously accurate. It is based on the book by 2 friends of mine, and unlike, let's say, Oliver Stone's JFK, it is, I would say, quite accurate and doesn't deal in conspiracy theories or anything like that. I guess my concern with it somewhat is in the omissions. It does leave out a lot in terms of what actually happened after we used the bomb.
Could you give us an example of something it leaves out that you feel is critical?
Well, there's quite a few things in terms of it sort of ignores the radiation issue, the sort of the new revolutionary aspect of these bombs. It never does show any images of what happened in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. We see Oppenheimer very briefly watching some footage, but we don't see the footage. And I think one of the biggest lacks in the movie is that you do see Oppenheimer and hear him expressing regrets But you never quite understand why, because the decision to use the bomb is not really questioned.
I was just going to say, isn't that sort of the crux of the enigma of Oppenheimer? And isn't that part of what makes him such a fascinating, and in some ways, I think, warning for the future? He was so involved with this scientific project, and after the fact, something that he thought might lead sensible-minded folks away from war, he realizes quite the opposite has happened, that he set into motion a series of events that would ultimately culminate in the Cold War and nuclear fears. I do think that seems to be sort of at the center of this long-running conversation that seems to be rekindled by the interest in this movie, no?
Well, I hope so. It does end with a very powerful, profound message about the future and current dangers and threats. I have to say it's 100 times better than the beginning or the end, which I write about in my book. But so it does have a powerful message on the future. And Oppenheimer's regrets, as you say, he was very conflicted, confused. And they show that in the movie, that he took great pride in really helping to make the bomb, but not so much pride in what was done with it afterwards. So I think it does leave the audience with questions on how to deal with what Oppenheimer's legacy really is.
We've been talking with Greg Mitchell, author of the book, The Beginning or the End, How Hollywood and America Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb. Greg, thanks so much for talking with us on the Texas Standard.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here.
Support for Texas Standard comes from Texas CASA, where court-appointed volunteers speak up for a child's best interests during their time in foster care. More at becomeacasa.org.
You got it tuned to the Texas Standard. I'm David Brown. If you grew up anytime in the last 6 decades, chances are somewhere along the line you encountered a Barbie doll. Barbie is ubiquitous in toy stores around the world. She's undergone quite the evolution since Mattel launched her in 1959. With the highly anticipated Barbie movie releasing this week, our producer Sarah Ash took a look at how we ended up in a world with over 1 billion Barbies in it and what the doll means to those who played with her.
What kinds of awesome things could you make Barbie do if you wanted to?
I could make her go on an airplane or drive one, or I could make her work at Disney World, or I could make her do tricks with a lion, or make clothes for animals.
This Barbie fan lives in the Texas Hill Country.
My name is June and I'm 6.
Hey! June was kind enough to show me her collection of Barbie dolls, and our managing producer, Laura Rice, was kind enough to let me talk to her daughter.
I got a whole dollhouse. It's really big.
June has a dozen or so Barbies, a decked-out dollhouse, and lots of doll clothes. She said her favorite dress is a golden white gown, which she had put on a dark-skinned Barbie with silky brown hair the day I visited.
2 of them are twins, but they came with different clothes.
For over 60 years, Barbie has offered kids an imaginative playworld full of fashionable outfits and, some argue, female empowerment.
Someday I'm gonna be exactly like you. Till then, just what I'll do, Barbie.
The doll has also been the subject of fierce debate and critique. As early as the 1960s, the feminist movement argued that Barbie reduces women to their looks and presents an unrealistic body standard for young girls. But there's no denying that Barbie was revolutionary when she hit the toy market. Before Barbie, dolls were all babies. Think cherubic cheeks, round bellies, and minimal hair.
When I grow up, I want to be a mommy.
Barbie's creator, Ruth Handler, was very clear that her doll was going to be different. Rather than give girls something to care for, Barbie was designed to give girls a future to dream about. That's why Handler told Connie Chung in a 1994 interview that she gave the doll mature features.
The whole idea was that a little girl could dream dreams of growing up, and every grown-up that she saw had breasts.
Handler co-founded Mattel. She came up with the idea for Barbie after encountering a German doll named Lily. Lily was based on a sexy comic strip character and sold to adults. Barbie launched as a tamer version for kids and named after Handler's daughter, Barbara.
Barbie was the center of her world and had this fabulous group of friends and this fantastic life and career and house and car. And it was just sort of like the woman who had it all.
Melissa Atkins-Wardy is the author of Redefining Girly. She played with Barbie growing up and actually consulted with Mattel to share a parent's perspective based on how her own daughter interacted with dolls.
One time she used all of my bras and hung them from her dresser so the Barbies could have sleeping hammocks. A lot of times the Barbies were on this island with kayaks and dinosaurs.
Nalani Llewellyn lives just north of Austin. She says she grew up on the Barbie movies of the early 2000s, and the stories and the dolls offered her a role model.
There's a princess in every girl. Come on, I want to introduce you to everyone.
The Mattel movies were really impactful, just how Barbie was talking to this younger girl in this older sister mentor figure, and as the eldest girl in my family, I didn't have that relationship. I was that relationship to my sisters. So just to be able to rely on that and to learn these lessons while still being, caught up in this world of princesses and ball gowns and magic, it was really great as a kid.
For some, the idealism of Barbie extends beyond her looks. In Barbie's world, women often have more power and agency than they do in real life. For example, Barbie famously took on one of her first of many careers as an astronaut in 1965.
Can do anything right, Barbie, astronaut Barbie. We can be the first in outer space.
That was 4 years before Neil Armstrong landed on the moon, and almost a decade before women could have their own credit cards in the United States. Aurora Sherman is an associate professor of psychology at Oregon State University.
Barbie has been U.S. president, even though the United States has still not elected an actual female president. She's been various types of practicing scientists. She has definitely been explored, at least, as a representation for girls, female presenting kids, as a positive role model, somebody to strive for.
But Sherman says her research shows that play with Barbie dolls is correlated with young girls narrowing their view of their own futures. In a 2014 study, Sherman asked girls ages 3 to 7 to consider a set of 10 careers. They identified which jobs they thought they could do and which jobs they thought boys could do.
We were interested in whether the type of toy that children played with would impact their ideas about future careers for themselves.
Sherman found that after playing with a fashion Barbie or a scientist Barbie, girls were more likely to give themselves fewer career prospects compared to girls who played with Mrs. Potato Head. Sherman says more research would be needed to determine exactly why that happened.
We do know that sexualized material does have an impact on adult women's cognitive performance and ideas about themselves, including self-esteem. And so we speculate that perhaps the elements of the Barbie doll, even in the doctor outfit, may have communicated to girls some messages that suggested less competence or less capability.
Part of this might come from Barbie's physical form.
Barbie is proportioned to have extremely large bust, extremely small waist, and extremely large hips. So generally her physical proportions indicate an extremely idealized version of the female human body, so idealized, in fact, that she would neither menstruate nor be able to stand up straight if she were an actual human being.
Atkins-Wardy says these factors can and should be a point of conversation between parents and kids around Barbie play. But she also points out that Mattel has made important strides on diversifying body size and other features in their Barbie line in recent years.
I grew up in the 80s, so I remember all of my Barbies were blonde, and I have black hair, so that made me sad, and I would cut my hair and tape it to my Barbies' heads because I was desperate for a dark-haired Barbie. And my mom used to use hair dye and dye some of my Barbies' hair.
Barbie has come a long way since then. Mattel released the first Black and Hispanic dolls named Barbie in 1980. In 2016, in response to softening sales, Mattel further diversified options. They launched new dolls with a widely expanded selection of body types, skin tones, eye colors, and hairstyles. Then, in 2022, Mattel released Barbies with disabilities, including a Barbie with a behind-the-ear hearing aid, one in a wheelchair, and a Barbie with a prosthetic leg. From a business perspective, the changes worked. Mattel had one of its highest-grossing years for Barbie in a decade in 2021, selling about $1.7 billion of Barbie brand products. Given Given the deep history that many have with the doll, perhaps it's not surprising that so many are excited to see the live-action Barbie movie. It's directed by Greta Gerwig and seems to have been made with grown-ups in mind. And just like in the movie, Barbie has made the jump into our world, and that includes Texas. In Austin, the iconic I Love You So Much mural received a temporary update proclaiming Ken's love of Barbie. In Dallas, there's a pop-up Destination Barbie Land with a glam boutique and disco dance floor. And a cafe in Houston is transforming into Barbie's dream house. So regardless of whether you plan to see the movie, keep an eye out for an extra splash of Barbie pink. And if you do have a kid in your life...
Well, this one used to have some clothes. I think she takes care of penguins. You can do anything with Barbie.
Ask them about their thoughts on Barbie. I'm Sarah Ash for the Texas Standard.
Support for Texas Standard comes from the Texas College Savings Plan, administered by the state of Texas. Families can save for tuition, room and board, books, and other qualified education expenses at eligible schools nationwide. Learn more at texascollegesavings.com.
It's the Texas Standard. I'm David Brown. Texas is seeing another summer of record-breaking temperatures, excessive heat warnings, advisories, almost a regular occurrence across the Lone Star State this July. Earlier this month, El Paso smashed their previous 23-day record of consistent days above 100 set back in 1994. We've asked public radio reporters across the state to see how people are coping with this brutal summer. From San Antonio, the Texas Standard's Alexandra Hart gets us started.
It's 8 p.m. on Monday, and even though the sun is going down, it's still 97 degrees in the shade at Brackenridge Park. That's down from the day's high of 103. Cameron Williams is cooling down from his evening run.
I try to get out, a couple times a week, but with the heat, it's kind of tough.
Williams is in the Army, stationed at nearby Fort Sam Houston. He likes to exercise here to keep up with military fitness standards. This is one of his favorite spots to run because of the shade and scenery.
Usually got to wake up either super early or come out here, usually probably later than now. It's still kind of hot out. It's kind of annoying, because normally I'd like to work out after work.
But he still prefers it to running on the treadmill at the gym.
I'm looking forward to the fall. I'd really like it to, cool off.
But up in Abilene, KACU's Heather Claiborne met a family that says they're just fine with the Texas summers.
It was a breezy 85 degrees when I caught Sarah and James Steffen during a morning walk with their 5 kids.
I kind of described it like opening an oven, like that heat that blasts you in the face. But then once you're out in it, then it's fine. We honestly don't mind the heat.
The family moved to Abilene from Canada more than a year ago. James says the minus 40-degree days they experienced in Canada were worse. So far, their neighbors at the RV park where they're living are surprised by how much their kids play outside.
If we were to keep them inside all the time, then bring them out in the heat, they would react to it a lot more severely.
Despite highs reaching the 100s in the afternoons, Sarah's happy with the relatively low humidity.
At least here in Abilene, it's a dry heat, so you don't feel wet all the time. We have friends who also moved from Canada. They were in Houston for probably about 4 months through the summer, and they said they never felt dry.
But head to Central Texas, and you'll feel much more humidity, as KUT's Mose Buchel reports from Austin.
Yeah, the heat has been record-breaking, but what was also remarkable, especially earlier this summer, was that humidity. Fortunately, the city of Austin overcame perennial staffing challenges to open every public swimming pool this summer. And you just heard someone dive into the coolest pool of all. I'm talking Barton Springs Pool, baby. Over 140,000 people visited here this past June. That's over 10,000 more people than visited the June of last year. And for me, that's especially interesting because June last year was also historically hot. It's part of a trend of hotter summers that we've had thanks to climate change and the urban heat island effect.
I was just telling my friend that I didn't even really notice the difference between last summer and this summer. I don't know, it's hot.
I just talked to Austinite Laura Sartucci. She says she's been here 3 times this summer and plans to be back many times more.
You just love the cool water. The cool water is definitely what chills you, cools you off.
Public health officials are telling people to do what they can to stay cool and hydrated in Austin. They say heat-related illnesses doubled last month from the previous year, and EMS calls are also way up. So I am now going to jump in and do what I can to cool myself off, and I'm going to pass you off to Texas Tech Public Media's Sarah Self-Walbrick in Lubbock, where I understand the weather's been a little milder.
It's almost 10 a.m., and Lubbock's McKenzie Park is bustling. Families fish along the river, taking advantage of the 74-degree morning. The Dust Breakers cycle group rides into the parking lot. They're out here every Sunday.
It was cool. It said 68 when I walked outside.
Member Drake Haney's about to start a second lap around the park.
Cloudy, nice breeze. This is a beautiful day.
Though temperatures later creeped up to 97.
This summer has been particularly warm, over 100 plus days. I mean, I don't even know how many days now. I mean, it's unrelenting.
It does feel more humid in Lubbock this summer, thanks to much needed rain and sporadic thunderstorms. We're not used to it, though. When weather comes up, folks around here more often say, at least it's a dry heat. But that's not fooling Haney.
Nothing's a dry heat, too.
Highs are currently in the triple digits in the Panhandle and South Plains, but it'll cool off a bit before the weekend. I'm Sarah Self-Walbrick in Lubbock, along with
Heather Claiborne in Abilene,
Mose Bouchel in Austin,
and Alexandra Hart in San Antonio.
And you are listening to the Texas Standard. Well, it's hot. I think we can say that. Yeah, I think that's been settled. Wells, I presume that the heat is something that a lot of folks are talking about online. What else are you hearing?
Yes. Well, yeah, folks chiming in about that one. Just reports. I'm looking at a post on our Facebook page, and folks decrying some of the issues they're having working in office buildings in Dallas that are having some air conditioning issues. Hopefully not terribly widespread, but as Stan Ayton puts it on our Facebook page, it's every day there are city buildings closed because of air conditioner problems. Definitely not the time you want to have that happen. And of course, on a additionally serious note, Barbara Rice, she notes her concern for something I believe we heard about in the news roundup there, saying, I'm very concerned for prisoners incarcerated in Texas prisons with no air conditioning as the summers get hotter and hotter. Indeed, we want to keep cool and hydrated for sure in this record heat wave that Texas is experiencing. Changing subjects, one way to stay cool at the movie theaters. I think you know where I'm going with this one, David.
Guardians of the Galaxy? No. I know.
The Barbenheimer. You know it, dude. Bob Reed says he can't wait until Friday. That from our Facebook page. Marilyn Knapp Litt, she says she is looking forward to seeing Oppenheimer since she started seeing ads for it, noting that she doesn't go to the movies too often, but will be hitting the Alamo Drafthouse in Corpus Christi. She says it has to be the first movie to tell the story of a nuclear reactor being built under the bleacher seats at the University of Chicago. Spoiler alert? I hope not.
No, from everything that I've read, it's quite the movie, and definitely a tale that has a lot of resonance for today. What with AI and other scientific, other technological innovations being unleashed on the world that could have world-changing events. It's a lot of folks saying it is a true instant classic.
Yeah, I'm trying to square away plans with my friend. There's IMAX theaters and then there's IMAX theaters. And here in the capital city at the Bob Bullock Texas History Museum, they have like the giant, like true IMAX theater, 70 millimeter experience. So I'm trying to square away my plans with that one. And of course, Barbie is going to be a huge blockbuster as well. And that was a real blockbuster report from our own Sarah Ash, delving into the history. I didn't know any of this stuff about the history of Barbie, and really it's adult origins. Very interesting stuff there. So if you haven't yet, steer that browser over to texasstandard.org, because we've got her story up with a whole heck of a lot more, including a bunch of these archival videos, even some data visualizations of just how incredibly popular this doll that's decades old is, reaching record sales. So really cool story, really cool build out. Steer it over to texasstandard.org to see that, if you will.
Well, Zunbar monitoring the talk of Texas. Our producers and reporters include the aforementioned Sarah Ash, Shelley Brisbane, Kristen Cabrera, Alexandra Hart, Michael Marks, Gloria Martinez, and Sean Saldana. Raul Alonso is our digital producer. We're out of time for the broadcast. We'll be back here tomorrow, and we hope you'll join us.
Philanthropic support for Texas Standard comes from Casey and Scott O'Hare, the Winkler Family Foundation, Lynn Dobson and Greg Wooldridge, Adrian Killam, the George Huntington family, and the Cynthia and George Mitchell Foundation.
I'm taco journalist Mando Rayo on the Tacos of Texas, a Muy Rico podcast from Identity Productions in partnership with KUT and KUTX Studios. Join us as we explore the taco culture of Texas through the eyes of the people in the Lone Star State. Subscribe to the podcast now, and when we drop the next episode, you'll get it the day it comes out.